Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Statewide Disability Advisory Council, also known as the SDAC virtual event. My name is Bobby Dutta. Eduardo Juarez and I are the co-chairs of SDAC. Now, to kick off our event, we have State Controller Betty Yee. With 35 years of experience in public service, Betty Yee has been State Controller since 2015. Following 2 terms on the California Board of Equalization. As the state's chief fiscal officer, she chairs critical boards and commissions, overseeing taxation, state lands, water, public pensions, housing, energy, transportation, and more. Controller E is the 10th woman in the California history to be elected to statewide office. It is my great honor to present Controller Betty E. Controller E, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you to everyone joining us virtually today. What I thought I'd do is just share a little bit about my work with all of you. Talk about just the state of the state a little bit. We've had obviously a challenging year. I think all of us have felt that it's been a challenge both professionally and personally, and a year of just challenge after challenge. And so just wanted to give you a state of the state, as well as then looking at the pandemic's economic impact, certainly on in our communities, but certainly on for people with disabilities. Talk about some initiatives of our office and also our efforts to improve accessibility. So really looking forward to the discussion and conversation. So in my role as controller, it has been a time where our responsibilities have been heightened. A lot of departments counting on us, a lot of vendors counting on us, a lot of stakeholders just throughout the state counting on us. So I and my team, we fulfilled many of the fiduciary duties of the state, including tracking revenues and monitoring our expenditures. And I do want to give a shout out to our Governor Gavin Newsom, who handled this pandemic really aggressively when it began just over a year ago. He was able to obtain a major presidential emergency declaration that had the monies from FEMA flowing to California fairly early. And even though we had historic budget reserves at the time that the pandemic started, they had the potential of being drained very, very quickly had we not received the FEMA funds. So I was very happy about that from the controller's perspective, in that we did not have to do any external borrowing to pay the bills for California through the end of the last fiscal year. And then, of course, this fiscal year, we have seen revenues actually exceeding our budget projections. And so there is actually some hopeful news with respect to our cash position. So as I said, I oversee auditing. I manage the state's cash, issue the financial statements for the state of California, and then also ensure that our state agencies continue to maintain strong internal accounting controls. And that's important from the perspective of investors who do business with the state to be sure that our state's fiscal health is intact. I also serve on dozens of different governing and financing authorities that include the boards of the nation's 2 largest public pension funds, CalPERS and CalSTRS. I serve on the State Lands Commission and the Franchise Tax Board. The controller actually has a seat on over 70 different boards and commissions. Not all of them are active at the same time. I personally serve on about 7 of them. So, but perhaps of most interest to all of us here today, my office administers payroll for hundreds of thousands of state employees. I know how much state employees count on a reliable and timely paycheck, especially in this last uncertain year. In the beginning of the COVID pandemic, I actually was very heartened to receive quite a bit of feedback from those with whom we do business. And probably the best compliment that I was able to share with my team was how the controller's office was really becoming known as the fiscal first responder. And it was just really a nice compliment to I and my team, who, like many of you, had to pivot very, very quickly to be in a remote work situation. I have about 2/3 of my team who are working remotely, and the rest are on site because of security issues. And it is, I'm just very proud of my team in terms of our ability to continue to deliver. So just kind of moving back a little bit, we have a new administration in Washington. And so I thought I'd give you some updates on the national economy. And I'm pleased to report that our economic conditions, both statewide and nationally, have improved considerably, especially considering where we were in 2020. We had significant GDP declines in 2020, really kind of the largest in modern history, after it had increased just the year before in 2019 by 2.2%. And, it is a measure of economic performance and strength. But in recent months, we have seen GDP growth quite substantially. So right at the end of 2020, we saw it rise about 4%. And this is a sign of the economy picking up again. Certainly, people going back into jobs. But the unemployment situation was quite dire, obviously, at the beginning of the pandemic. Right now, the national unemployment rate stands at about 6.2%. That's after a gain of almost 370,000 jobs in February. So we are seeing definitely people back to work. Most of these job gains occurred in the leisure and hospitality sector, which was heavily hit in the early parts of the pandemic. So this is probably suggesting kind of a gradual reopening of the economy as it relates to that particular sector. Here in California, the unemployment rate dropped from 9.3% in December to 9% in January. And just for context, the national unemployment rate last April was about 14.8%, and it was about 15.5% state here in California. So quite a bit of improvement. We do most of our work based on economic forecasts, and the one that California relies pretty heavily on is the UCLA Anderson School of Business forecast, which shows that there are positive things on the horizon, also for not just California but for the nation as well. Both UCLA predicts that both the U.S. and California will experience record growth this year as a result of the accelerating vaccinations and considerable federal stimulus and also state stimulus to individuals and businesses. The forecast predicts that California will sustain growth into 2022 and 2023. And after shrinking by 3.5% in 2020, the forecast predicts that the U.S. GDP will grow to 6.3% this year, 4.6% in 2022, and 2.7% in 2023. So, we look at just all of these things that are essentially telling us that we are on the mend. And I do have to say, from the perspective of the vaccines, I also oversee the expenditures and review the independent audit for the stem cell agency, our California Institute on Regenerative Medicine, CIRM. And what's been very, very heartening is really the response to getting a vaccine and developing a vaccine and getting it to market. Unprecedented in terms of the speed that was able to happen. And even though that's of no consolation to those who have been affected directly by the virus, it certainly is something that we have not seen in the past. And we're just very grateful for the fact that many of the researchers of that vaccine are right here in California. They worked with a global medical research community that I think all were just motivated similarly to try to get something developed and quickly and into the arms of people, as many people around the world as possible. So, the job losses, I will say that really came in three sectors. As I said, leisure and hospitality were hit very, very hard, but also many of our service industries, just our retail service industries as well. I don't think there was any place in California you could walk down Main Street during the pandemic and not see the impacts of businesses like repair shops and salons and barbershops and just small businesses. Retail trade was down, and when we look at all that, the question is: are they going to be able to reopen in much the same way that they were able to operate prior to the pandemic? Given the public health guidelines, there are significant amounts of assistance, both in federal and state dollars, to help small businesses, and I'm hopeful that many of them can get back on their feet again. Another factor affecting our economy is that we are a global economy, the fifth largest in the world. And so international trade and tourism is also very much affected. And we saw actually tourism pretty much come to a halt in so many of our popular destinations here in California. And of course, with tourism comes a lot of consumer spending by tourists, and those dollars particularly affected local government budgets most heavily. And then, I think one of the things that is really indicative of how California is almost a tale of two cities is that, we see all of this depressed economic activity during the pandemic. And yet, as I said at the outset, our revenues are actually coming in above budget projections. And the tale of two cities is this. We are home to a number of high income earners who have continued to do well during this pandemic. And so the reality is that we have these additional revenues, particularly from our personal income taxes and corporation taxes, and most attributable to the tech sector here in California. But we do have revenues coming in above projections because corporations and the wealthy are doing well. For the rest of California, it has been very, very difficult. You've seen the numbers with respect to the numbers of unemployment claims. But so California is really a tale of two cities. So while on the one hand, we saw many of our sectors really becoming depressed during the pandemic, our wealthy and our corporations continue to do well. The stock market continued to do well. And so those who depend on stock market related income for their earnings did very well and paid a lot of taxes to California. And that's really the reason why our budget is in better shape than expected. However, it's also very volatile. And so what we see this year as growth could mean it may not be sustained next year, which is why it's always very difficult to budget given the circumstance. But the tale of two cities is this. We've seen the billions and billions of Californians who have applied for unemployment benefits, still many workers who have not found work. And obviously, housing has been a major issue with respect to the affordability of housing, the ability to stay in housing. The eviction moratoria, yes, have been extended, but at the same time, we know that for people who are not working, this has been particularly still a hardship. So much of the federal relief and some California relief will be to help renters and also small landlords, so that we hope that more Californians are not displaced from a housing perspective. So, I mentioned that because it's always been the challenge when we think about our budget and just how we put our additional revenues to work. The governor has proposed a budget, which I think is very, very smart, and it's called, and the cornerstone of it is building up resiliency. So essentially looking at how we replenish our reserves, particularly our rainy day fund, which was really what we drew down during the early months of the pandemic. Looking at putting additional dollars away for school stabilization, which the legislature has just proposed to help schools reopen again safely. To look at how we continue to provide for a reserve for our safety net programs, so that those who really are most vulnerable have the ability to continue to receive assistance. So the governor's budget assumes a surplus of about $15 billion in this next fiscal year, 21-22, and I know the bulk of that will be to just gird for a structural deficit in the years after that, because we don't expect the additional revenues to necessarily repeat itself of this magnitude. One bit of positive news for state employees is that Governor Newsom has expressed hope that the state worker furloughs may be suspended in 21-22. And should revenues continue to be strong as he issues his May revision of the budget, I know that he has asked CalHR to potentially start bringing back the bargaining units to the table to talk about reinstating the excuse me, the pay cut for state employees. Excuse me, the pay cut for state employees that we've all taken for this current year. So it is a time where California continues to operate. All of you have continued to serve in much the same way that's been expected of the public. And I hope that as we continue to do so, that the conditions under which we are able to do that will keep improving. It is I think, really unknown about how quickly the economy will fully reopen. It is, I think, a time when, with this pandemic and the recession, some of the more critical issues have been brought to the forefront. And I would say that housing affordability is definitely one of those. That this has become a crisis here in California. Even prior to the pandemic, we did not have the units of housing to meet the demand with respect to affordable housing and low-income housing. We are building housing at record levels, but record levels aren't even, they're really at the margin in terms of what the overall need is. And so I know that there will be much more emphasis placed on this, not only by this administration, but also by our new federal administration as well. The other aspect of this is also looking at what work is going to look like going forward. We know that for many of our low-wage service sector workers, particularly in retail, particularly in our service industries and leisure hospitality, but also in the care sector, that these have been very, very vulnerable sectors of our workforce. And I just finished my service on the Governor's Future of Work Commission, and our recommendations were placed before the governor. The governor's office did issue the report about a week ago with some recommendations. And the idea here is, how do we look at a future social compact with workers? Because so much has happened over the past 40 years where we've seen tremendous productivity, but we've seen essentially wages and compensation remain very, very stagnant. So that those who are, as I said, making a lot and earning a lot are doing well, and the rest of the economy, the rest of the workforce and economy are not doing well. And what I would say is that we were on the verge of this for a long time. We've had a very, very vulnerable economy from a workforce perspective. Prior to the pandemic, about 1/3 of California workers made $15 an hour or less. That's 1/3. And I don't know how you sustain an economy on that. And when you look at a sector like the care sector, which is essentially, whether it's childcare, elder care, caring for people with disabilities, other special needs, you think about how so much of that work is about family members, providing that care, unpaid care. Or you think about families having to pay for that care, which is still quite expensive. But I do think there is going to be a lot of focus on the care sector because California is an aging state. We have an aging population where we know that the needs for care are going to become even greater as we see an aging population. So I'm just thrilled that we're going to finally shine a light on some of the most vulnerable aspects of our workforce and try to look at ways to lift up those workers. And then I will say this with respect to the state workforce. I hope that in the future we can be more accommodating when we talk about workplace equity to where I think we've learned a lot with respect to remote work and what that means for the state and certainly for workers, that it can be a viable long-term option if we ensure that there's equity, that all of our workers have the tools that they need to be able to work remotely, if that is the desire. So there will be more work done in terms of just evaluating remote work and telework on a statewide basis. But I can just say that from my own experience in the state controller's office, we have learned a lot. And we've learned how, frankly, a hybrid situation could be a long-term option in terms of being able to offer that as a way to work for people who need flexibility with their personal lives. What I want to do now is to just shift gears on the federal government, because this has been unprecedented when you think about the new spending at the federal level. I know that in December, our former president signed stimulus legislation that provided California with just a huge infusion of dollars, $20 billion in unemployment benefits, another $17 billion in stimulus checks, the $600 stimulus checks for individuals, $2 billion in rental assistance that we're getting out the door still, but also dollars for schools and dollars for childcare. And understanding that childcare has been, one of those areas that has really been a deciding factor as to whether how quickly people are able to get back to work. And this has been something that has been a national issue, not just specific to California. The most recent $1.9 trillion federal stimulus bill signed by President Biden last week will provide a significant boost to reopening the economy. And it will be essentially a $40 billion allocation to the state of California and to our cities and counties. So just a huge infusion of dollars. We are going to be flush with cash. So from a cash perspective, certainly I and my team are happy about that. We're not going to be doing any external borrowing. As you saw yesterday, the Internal Revenue Service just extended the tax filing deadline, and California will likely follow suit into May by a month. And that delay in tax revenue will not have much impact from a cash perspective because of the huge infusion of federal dollars. And I think the headline item in the latest stimulus package is the $1,400 stimulus checks for individuals earning less than $75,000 a year and couples making under $150,000 a year. So really some real assistance for so many families who have been struggling. Also extending unemployment programs through September, and this includes a $300 per week federal supplement that was provided in the December stimulus plan. So, all of this is just to say that this is relief, and one of the things I just want to emphasize is when we talk about this relief, certainly very helpful in the near term with respect to what Californians are experiencing, particularly those among us who really have a myriad of needs. First and foremost, the ability to stay in housing, the ability to hopefully put food on the table. But these are not long-term solutions. And I just want to emphasize that because I think there's an expectation that when this relief is here, that it's going to last and will be sustained. But it is exactly that, it's relief. So we still will have a housing crisis after all is said and done with all of this relief dollars. We're still going to have an economy that may not look the same as it did before the pandemic when all of this relief is said and done. We don't believe this will be the last pandemic that we will see. Already we have been hearing about the variants to the virus that are also plaguing some communities. But it seems that the vaccines that are out and being distributed now are effective against those virus variants. And so we're pleased to hear about that. I also just want to give you some updates about our pensions because I do sit on the CalPERS board. And I know as state employees, many of you have pensions on your mind, or I hope you have pensions on your mind. And I just want to give you some good news on that front. At this moment, both funds are, CalPERS is outperforming expectations, and that since the beginning of the onset of the pandemic, which seems odd because the economy is not doing well. But what has done well is the stock market. All of what I call the stay-at-home stocks. I mean, how much are we relying on Google and Amazon and just, all these stay-at-home stocks that have been just doing very, very well. And that just means that our investment returns have shown that to be the case as well. Early in the public health crisis, I think the initial market shocks cost the pension funds, cost public pensions, I guess, across the country, close to $1 trillion, which really had us gasping. But at the same time, we were able to rebalance our portfolios after the extreme volatility last year. And the markets did rebound. And a lot of it also had to do with the Federal Reserve just putting a lot of stimulus into the market. And so it has been very, very helpful in terms of continuing to have us pay the benefits to our retirees and beneficiaries, and at the same time be able to put us in a position of being able to be more competitive with some of the investment opportunities that we see in the market. We have also both funds, the CalPERS too, we have a risk mitigation strategy. So since the economic crisis of 2008. We have a risk mitigation strategy that has essentially provided more stability for the portfolio so that should there be a downturn, we're not going to see the losses be as deep as they were back in 2008-9. And that has truly been the case. And we've had also had liquidity enough to pay the benefits without running out of assets to do that. So as of June 30th of 2020, we had about $392.5 billion of assets under management at CalPERS. And at the end of the year, that climbed to $442.7 billion. And we're just continuing to see just good performance on that front. So, all of this said, I think what I want to do now is just to kind of turn it to, what this has meant for all of us during this time. This is a community of state employees. I think all of us have felt that, I hope there's been a recognition. I know we have heard it. As much as government gets, I think a bad rap a lot of times. I hope all of you have been hearing about how appreciative people are of government. Put aside the EDD debacle for now. That's a completely, just a different situation that is going to require a different kind of response, chronic situation. But I think what I certainly have heard is that the members of the public are so grateful for government continuing to be there, continuing to deliver at a time of crisis for so many people and their families in California. And I know that you've all been hearing about how the disproportionate toll of the coronavirus has really fallen on our most vulnerable communities. And unfortunately, this is also the case for people with disabilities during this pandemic. Early on, I know the community faced significant barriers to testing and to treatment, and now we're seeing inequities in vaccine distributions as well. And registration and information for vaccination sites seems to be inaccessible for those who are visually impaired. I'm actually going to visit a site tomorrow at the Oakland Coliseum, and these are the things that I always look for: is just how easy is the access, not just about making the appointment, but just on site. Many of the vaccination sites aren't even accommodating to those with mobility issues, and that's a huge problem. I know when my 97-year-old mother got her vaccine shot, she actually was able to stay in the car and just essentially had to expose her arm. But for many, many other sites, that's not the case. The Centers for Disease Control has identified disabled people at particular risk of COVID-19, really because of underlying medical conditions. We often hear about that with respect to either the Latino community, the API community, but I think there really has been a disregard of people with living with disabilities in terms of some underlying medical conditions there as well. And so it's not only the immediate health concern that should be of note for those in the disabled community, but recent studies suggest that there are lingering economic effects as well. And I just want to cite a study that was published in the Oxford Academic Journal for Public Health that found that 50% of people with disabilities face reduced work hours compared to 45% for people with no disabilities. 7% of people with disabilities used a food bank compared to 1.7% of respondents without disabilities. 8.1% of respondents with disabilities have gone hungry in April 2020, compared to 4.4% of respondents with no disabilities. And then 16.6% of people with disabilities were behind on paying their bills, as compared to 9.1% of people with no disabilities. And so, and we see these difficulties reflected in the employment statistics as well. In 2020, the unemployment rate for people with disabilities stood at about 12.6%, which increased by 5.3% from the previous year. And so this is, in the first few months of the pandemic, we saw a loss of almost 1 million jobs held by workers who had disabilities. So we know the impacts of the job loss, the economic dislocation can be compounded, especially as your savings are affected, housing security is affected, and certainly health outcomes are compromised. And so I do hope that this time where we've seen so many of the inequities revealed, for so many communities that certainly the disabilities communities will be be more aggressive with respect to just being sure that these points are not lost when we are developing strategies for how we bring back the economy, develop strategies for our healthcare, not just related to the pandemic, but in general, and many other policies as well. There are some hopeful developments, and I wanted to share those. Particularly as we talk about moving to remote work and the more availability for telehealth and telehealth for mental health as well. And the potential, I think that has the potential for improving access and increasing opportunities. Still not fine-tuned, I think, to the point of where there can be full accessibility, but certainly an effort underway for that to happen. And then, heading an organization like the State Controller's Office that oversees the state workforce, I know how critical diversity of talent and perspective is. And employers like the state of California should work to ensure all remote work applications are accessible to everyone, which brings me to some of the efforts that my office has helped to create. And I'll just try to conclude by just highlighting a few things. Last year, the Controller's Office rolled out Cal Employee Connect. I hope all of you are familiar with it. A secure web portal that allows state and California State University employees to view and print and electronically save your employment records. And this really came out of an initiative that we thought would not be rolled out until well into this year. And, we now, state employees can now access, you can access your own W-2s, your leave balances, your direct deposit earning statements, which historically were only available in paper form. And part of why this was accelerated was because we found that we could keep, more people working remotely if we didn't require the paper directed advice notices. And so we decided to accelerate this initiative. Our department had originally slated for Cal Employee Connect to go statewide by August of this year. And I'm just proud of my team for having expedited its release in the spring of last year, just as the pandemic forced many of us to work from home. So it's now used by more than 187 agencies, departments, campuses, and commissions. And so just a huge shout out to my team on that. It also can be accessed from anywhere in the continental US or Canada, from almost any internet-enabled device, including mobile phones, which is an important feature as remote work options continue to expand. The Cal Employee Connect team is getting ready for its second application dedicated to state human resources staff, and which will allow staff to securely send documents to the controller's office, which then will eliminate the need for faxing or mailing documents. So we're just trying to finally get caught up with the 21st century, but more importantly, just make things definitely more accessible and user-friendly for our customers. And there are future plans to address more, paper-based workloads, such as for change of address, changing your withholdings, signing up for direct deposit. And I encourage everyone watching today to visit the Cal Employee Connect website at connect.ca.gov. It is a site that I hope once you are on it that you'll sign up for it, and it will be everything will be at your fingertips if you're able to do that. Before I wrap up, I want to just also give a shout out to some of the efforts of my office to improve accessibility and to foster a more inclusive work environment. Our office publishes a quarterly newsletter on our intranet site, promoting resources and career opportunities for all of our employees. And we've hosted 2 diversity and disability awareness fairs, and we're planning a virtual disability fair in 2021. We work with our managers and employees to schedule sign language interpreters, readers, and provide assistive devices during meetings and trainings. Our EEO office also works with our employees with disabilities to further their careers, really as a discrete kind of a focus and attention on our employees who do have disabilities. We offer career counseling through programs like the Limited Examination Appointment Program, and we've seen employees promote from really low-paying to entry-level classifications, and that's what we definitely want all of our employees to be able to do, but especially those who have disabilities. Our own Disability Advisory Committee works with our EEO office to present during new employee orientations to encourage participation and outreach to all employees. we continue to improve accessibility, provide opportunities, and to create a healthy work environment for all employees. And I'm just also happy to say that we recently updated our strategic plan, and one of the biggest prongs of that plan is to build a more inclusive workplace, and not just from a gender, racial equity perspective, but really as it relates to equity for all of our employees. And so we really take pride in the fact that we want to have our employees themselves think about ways that they can promote and really have a stake in building a more inclusive workplace. So before I take questions, I just want to say how grateful I am to have been invited to speak to you today. I remember being with you just about a year ago prior to the pandemic, and I hope that this time continues to find all of you staying healthy. The work that all of you do in supporting state workers and promoting equitable workplaces is so important. And I just can't say enough about what that means, particularly during this time when the needs are so great, and to not forget the tremendous talent that we have in our state workforce with people who are working with disabilities is just really commendable. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for always being the eye about how we can do better by promoting equity in this space. And I really look forward to taking your questions today. Thank you. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you so much, Controller Yee. You have given us such a wealth of information, informative presentation touching from budget, remote work, pension, California Connect. I'm quite grateful that your office continued to perform wonderfully during this pandemic. And I'm happy to state and report that I got all my paychecks. So I was happy about that. So thank you very much. And I appreciate the grace and information that you provided. I would love to have our audience ask you any questions. Bring that up if you have a few minutes.
Of course.
Great.
Okay, well, this is Susan. Hi.
Hi, Susan.
I'm the moderator here, so I'm going to start off with a question from the chat box, and then afterwards we'll give you a question from the audience. M. Jenkins asks, is the telework efforts fiscally more advantageous to the state budget, and do we provide extra IT home support to employees who experience challenges/disabilities?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's going to remain to be seen. It differs from agency to agency and department to department, depending on the type of work. But I will say that Governor Newsom really has, I think, a thought that telework will be a permanent option. He's asked us, all state agencies, to look at, as part of our savings going forward, looking at our space needs and whether we have the ability to reduce our space needs to save on lease costs. But certainly, I think for me, during the early days of the pandemic and telework, I actually commissioned a report from the Stanford Law School to look at issues of equity related to telework. And we actually turned that report over to the Department of General Services because we had a telework policy that really hadn't been implemented in a robust way. And I think from my perspective, I think it actually can be fiscally advantageous. I think when we, and from a number of perspectives, I actually think if we can be more responsive to the needs of employees where we can provide that flexibility of working remotely, that we actually are, the productivity will stay the same or even exceed what we're seeing now. And I think for all departments, we've seen productivity exceed. The fact that we're meeting this way virtually, and I don't know about all of you, but I am on this thing all hours of the day and night. And by the time I peel back, I think, my gosh. But I do feel like I've accomplished so much more because we're able to connect so much easier. So these virtual platforms have been great. Another set of issues that sets in around being on the screen for a long period of time. So short answer, yes, I think it can be advantageous. And then the answer is qualified by the fact that I still think we have to take into consideration some of the equity needs in terms of how we are fully equipping our employees to be able to telework in the most effective way.
Would anybody like to unmute and ask a question through the audio?
Sure. This is John Taruk.
Hi, Jen.
I'm a member of the ED Directors Statewide Disability Committee and a disabled worker and an elected senior steward for SEIU Local 1000. First, I want to thank Controller Yee for your very comprehensive and thorough state of the state. It really helps a lot to get the big picture like that and of the efforts of the Controller's Office in meeting the challenges brought for the state workforce by this pandemic and depression. As a new steward, I spent quite a bit of time, and one of the reasons I joined the ED Directors Disability Advisory Committee, doing individual representation of fellow workers who were denied disability related accommodations, and with some success. One of the things that was refused back then, I've been in state service 11 years, was telework as an accommodation. So that, of course, is now completely changed. Right. But I want to ensure and encourage that in thinking about working with disabled workers, that we always encourage best practices in the reasonable accommodation area. And because of that, I had been working down in the weeds with all of these individual claims. I wanted to see it from the policy level at my agency. And so that's been a real, it's been a really good learning experience. And I want to add this conversation today here as it is also a great learning experience. And thank you everyone for your service to for diversity and equity and inclusion within your agencies and across the state. Not really a question, just thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You know, I have, I will say, generally, prior to the pandemic, I was doing quite a bit of traveling around the state. Many of the boards and commissions on which I serve meet in different locations around the state, and I've not done much traveling at all. In fact, I don't think I've been on a plane for months. I think I had to go to a funeral, but that was about it. And what I will say is, being just completely focused and immersed in the operations 24/7 in my office. And I've known this, but I can speak to it with, just greater certainty now. We have tremendous, tremendous talent within state government, tremendous talent. And I hope that, and in fact, I even mentioned this to the governor, because he was so focused on the COVID response. Everything was healthcare, everything was public health, everything was, and I said, I hope that you will find time before the end of the year just to extend a note of thanks to the people who really behind the scenes continue to do the work and to deliver for the people of California. And I'm just heartened by the fact that, we're here. I shudder to think what would happen if we weren't, for the lives of so many people in California. And I've said this almost jokingly, but I'm serious because I always do battle with the Sacramento Bee, but I am determined to have them start a column about what great things happen in state government, not just the bad things, because for every bad thing they write about, there are millions of good things that are being done every day to deliver for the people of California. So thank you. Thank you for that comment.
So Controller Yee, this is Susan Turnquist once again. I actually am on the committee with John at EDD.
Yes.
And I had a question for you. I heard that you have been a part of some interesting committees, like the Future of Work. Mm-hmm. And I heard you talk about the care sector. Yes. And my question is, has in your involvement, has the topic of the fiscal situation of persons with disabilities in the workforce come up as a part of your involvement in these committees?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has, but it has not gotten the kind of attention that I had hoped it would. And I think a lot of it is just, when I served on the commission, we had a pretty tall charge, but very limited time to really come to a set of recommendations. It's a pretty broad-based work group as well. It included, I was the only state government level person. We had 2 legislators, a lot of business, labor, tech. And what I would say is, I don't think the commission really had the bandwidth to do the deep dive on issues like that. I'm hopeful that our recommendations will then take it to the next step of where we can do a deep dive. But I also thought, when I would raise in our small work groups the issues around, just populations of workers who generally are not, recognized, people with disabilities, formerly incarcerated people, youth, people in transition of whatever type. It seemed to be kind of a one-off, and to me, it just speaks to like a total. And I'll just use the word kind of ignorance around the fact that, we have this talent here that could be harnessed pretty quickly. And I think there's just very little understanding about, what needs need to be addressed. And so I'm hopeful that this is the next level of where we could bring some attention to that. I will say that one of my colleagues on the Future of Work Commission, a woman named Carla Javits, was very, very focused on, these particular communities, because I think there is certainly in the private sector, there's been, I think, a lot more recognition than in the public sector about how to really provide, opportunities and lift up these communities as it relates to having them be part of the fully participating and fully active economy.
Thank you so much for asking that question. I'm going to throw it back to Bobby.
Thank you, Susan. Controller E, I have a follow-up question relating to the budget that you mentioned earlier. You mentioned that there was $15 billion surplus, and there's a May revision that's coming up. You also mentioned that the state workers took a pay cut in exchange for the personal leave program, PLP, and you're optimistic that that's ending, or at least the governor indicated that that's ending. My understanding is that many of the unions negotiated a side letter agreement which automatically ends that in the event that state doesn't dip into the rainy day fund. And if so, if that goes away, also many of the unions negotiated a pay raise, which was suspended effective last year. Is that going to be reinstated to your knowledge? And can you confirm that 9.23% pay reduction that many of the state workers have taken will actually be fully restored effective 1st of July, the fiscal year?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, I'm aware of all the side letters. So I think when the governor has made reference to the pay cut, it's just the 9+% pay cut. I know that pay raises were suspended, which is why I think he is asking Cal HR to bring the bargaining units back to the table. And I don't know what the thinking is with respect to the suspension of those scheduled raises. But the public statements he's made has really related to the base cut for this year.
Great. Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions for Controller E?
Oh, I actually see one in the comments. Could you ask Controller E if there's any data as to whether remote work has been cost saving for the state of California? Do we know that?
Too early to tell. No, that is the $64 million question. Too early to tell. If I were to speculate, I would say it probably would show, particularly because this is really the initial year that we've really instituted remote work in a broad fashion. I would say there probably were some additional costs. I hope that they're modest. I know that's kind of been our experience in the state controller's office, but I do think over the long term, it definitely could be a cost savings.
Do we have anybody else that would like to unmute and ask a question?
Don't be shy.
Okay, I'm going back to you, Bobby.
In that case, I'm very grateful, Controller E, you took the time out from your very busy schedule to come and present at SDAC. I hope you'll come back soon and give us more good information.
Sure.
So Thank you again for joining SDAC, and have yourself a terrific day.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Really appreciate being with you. Take care.
You too.